I still remember that morning like it was a photograph pinned to my refrigerator. Sunlight came through the kitchen window in a flat, honest strip, and the smell of coffee filled the room, burnt at the edges, warm in the mug. I was folding the church bulletin, my fingers tracing the glossy page where the youth retreat announcement sat. Pine Valley Retreat. $5,000 needed. My hands, the same hands that once held chalk in class lists for 30 years, hesitated over the blank checkbook. The paper felt thin, but the numbers were heavy. Harold used to joke that I put my faith where my checkbook was. He isn't here to laugh anymore. His voice is a soft echo in the big house. My pearls, the strand he gave me on our 40th anniversary, slid against my collarbone as I wrote the amount. They felt cool, familiar, a little like a promise. My thumb stayed on the ink for a second. Then I sealed the envelope. On Sunday after service, Pastor Greg took my hands. His palms were warm, his smile practiced. I could smell the faint perfume of his cologne, a soft church supper kind of scent. He held my hands longer than necessary, eyes bright in that way that convinces a room. "Dorothy," he said, voice a little thick, "you are a blessing." I felt my chest bloom with something like heat. For a moment I believed I belonged to something bigger than my quiet house. Betty Morgan from the Ladies' Committee asked if I would come see the retreat. Of course, I told her. My voice didn't shake much. Pastor Greg had said I was essential, and the word settled into me like a patch over a long-ago hole. I pictured teenagers laughing around a campfire, my grandchildren's faces lit by flames, saying the words I had prayed for them to know. The week at Pine Valley came with photo texts and short videos. There was the damp smell of the forest over the phone screen, the distant peal of a counselor's laugh, the scrape of hiking boots on gravel. Each picture made my chest tighter in a good way. On the last night they held the testimony service. I dressed carefully that evening. Navy dress, pearls tucked under my collar, sensible shoes. The pearls had become a talisman. I told myself to breathe. When I stepped into the fellowship hall, the air smelled of warm cider and the waxy polish of folding chairs. People were serving a simple dinner, voices low and familiar. Sarah waved from the buffet line, but when I mentioned how much I'd been looking forward to the testimonies, her smile faltered. She looked at Linda Peterson, and I felt the temperature of the room shift, like a draft that finds the corners. I followed the others toward the main doors. The noise of teenagers, that bright raw sound, rose like a tide. Then Pastor Greg was there in the doorway, his suit slightly rumpled, a black Bible tucked under his arm like a shield. He put his hand on the frame and without looking away from me said, "Dorothy, you didn't need to come inside." My stomach dropped. The hall felt suddenly too small. "But Pastor," I began because words had weight I could measure. He cut me off with a smile that was all teeth. "This is a space for staff and the youth. Privacy. They need to speak freely, without adults." He leaned forward just a little. "You understand." The word outsider never left his mouth, but it arrived anyway. It landed on my shoulders like a cold shawl. My fingers closed around my purse strap until the leather bit into my palm. I could hear laughter from inside, a young voice rising in a hymn. Through the slim window of the door I could see the stage and the cross hastily taped to plywood. The light from inside made the glass a mirror of everything I had been told I was. "Your donation was critical, Dorothy," Pastor Greg said quickly, as if repeating a line we'd both rehearsed. His hand brushed the Bible at his side. "We appreciate you. But this night—" He stopped, and the sentence hung there, unfinished like a hymn cut short. I looked at Linda then. Her smile was a practice thing. Her fingers clutched a clipboard. Sarah's notebook was open in her lap like a shield. None of them met my eyes. The pearls at my throat felt heavier. I stood by the exit like a sentinel. The door was cool under my palm, the metal handle smooth and unyielding. Behind that glass, teenagers stood and spoke into a mic, their voices raw and trembling with things that sounded like salvation. I pressed my fingers to the window and listened. The words were clear: forgiveness, change, God met me here. Each phrase landed inside me like a small stone. Halfway through the testimonies, Ashley, my granddaughter, stepped up. Her voice broke on the first line. This week I learned what real sacrifice looks like. Her eyes scanned the faces in the room, and for a breath I thought she would look through the glass and find me. She didn't. She spoke of giving and of a Savior who gives without asking. My throat closed. The pearls at my collarbone felt like a noose and an anchor at once. When the service ended, the doors opened and young people spilled into the night. Faces flushed, voices tangled in excitement. Ashley and her brother saw me and ran across the gravel. They hugged me the way only grandchildren can, without asking permission, as if belonging is automatic. "Grandma," she said, breathless, "you were out here?" "They wouldn't let me in," I said. My voice had narrowed to a thin reed. "They said it's for staff and the youth." "But you paid for it," she said, confused, anger and hurt knitting her brow. "Why didn't they?" That night I slept with the pearls on. The house smelled like cedar and old book bindings. In the dark I turned it over in my head until it found shape. The next morning I called the church office. My fingers hovered over the phone like a child's at the edge of a pool. When Pastor Greg answered, I felt my pulse in my throat. I told him calmly, too calmly, that I'd like to redirect my donation to the community shelter in the next town. I said it slowly, listening to the small sound of my own voice, the sound of something shifting. As I hung up, the pearls were cool against my skin. I had given them away once in my life to mark something, an anniversary, a promise. Now I understood that giving doesn't always keep you in the room. Sometimes it gives you the courage to leave and build someplace you belong. Don't insist, Dorothy. Testimony night is for staff and the kids only. Pastor Greg stood in the doorway of the fellowship hall, his body a polite blockade, his smile stretched thin. My heart hammered at my temples. I gripped my purse so hard my knuckles went white. Through the door I could hear the teens singing, the very week my $5,000 had paid for. 3 months of my retirement gone into that check. My dears, thank you for spending a little of your precious time with me tonight. I want you to know this channel is just starting out. Every new subscriber is a breath of life to me. If this story touches you, please consider subscribing. We're trying to reach our first milestone of 1,000 friends here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love knowing the cities that hold us together. I still see that kitchen like a photograph. Sunlight cut a flat strip across the counter, and the coffee steam smelled a little burnt at the edges. I was folding the church bulletin and my fingers paused over the retreat announcement. Pine Valley, 5,000 needed. The paper felt thin and the number felt heavy, like a weight I could hand over to someone else. Harold used to joke that I put my faith where my checkbook was. He wasn't there to laugh, but his voice lived in the house. I wrote the amount with a hand that's taught schoolrooms for 30 years. The pearls at my throat, Harold's gift for our 40th, clicked softly against my collarbone as I sealed the envelope. When I handed the check to Pastor Greg after Sunday service, he took my hands and held them longer than I expected. His palms were warm, and I smelled the faint cedar of his cologne. "Dorothy," he said, eyes bright, "you are a blessing." For a moment I believed I belonged to something bigger than my quiet rooms. Betty Morgan invited me to see the fruits of the retreat. Pastor Greg had said I was essential, and that word fit into me like a patch. All week my phone filled with photos. Muddy hiking boots, a campfire's orange glow on my grandchildren's faces, counselors with armfuls of hymnals. Each image made my chest tighten in a good way. They told me about a testimony night on the last evening, when the kids would stand and speak what God had done. I dressed carefully that Friday. Navy dress, pearls tucked under the collar, sensible shoes. The drive to Pine Valley smelled of pine sap and late summer dust. When I walked into the fellowship hall, the air smelled of warm cider and the wax of full. He called me essential twice that night, as if repetition could soothe a bruise. "We appreciate you," he said, "but this is a special space." The word outsider. He never said it aloud, but he arranged his sentences around it as though it were true. I felt the leather strap of my purse bite into my palm. Linda's clipboard clicked against her hip. Sarah's notebook covered the absence in her eyes. I stood by the exit as if tethered there. The metal of the door was cool against my palm. Through the narrow window I saw a cross taped to plywood and a mic light catching young faces. Voices rose and fell. Forgiveness, change. God met me here. Those words were antiseptic and alive at once, and they entered me the way wind finds a loose pane. Halfway through, Ashley, my 16-year-old, walked to the mic. Her voice wavered. "This week," she said, "I learned what real sacrifice looks like. Like Jesus, who gave without expecting anything back." I watched her lips shape the words, and for one terrible second I thought she might look through the glass and find me. She didn't. She spoke of giving and surrender as if the world were only the stage before her. When the service ended, the doors opened and the kids poured into the cool night, the air full of laughter and hymns half-sung. Ashley ran to me with the kind of hug that bypasses pretense. "Grandma," she said, "you were outside?" "They wouldn't let me in," I told her. My voice felt small. "They said it's only for staff and the youth." "But you paid for it," she said, confusion and hurt knitting her brow. "Why didn't they let you?" That hurt wrapped itself differently than I expected. It wasn't about dollars so much as belonging. The next morning I called the church office. My fingers trembled at first, then steadied. When Pastor Greg answered, I told him calmly that I'd like to redirect my gift to the community shelter in the next town. "I've found another ministry I can be essential to," I said, and the words surprised me with their steadiness. Hanging up, I felt the pearls cool against my skin. Giving is strange. It can keep you in a room, but sometimes it sets you free to leave it. I learned that night that generosity doesn't guarantee a seat at every table. Sometimes it makes you brave enough to help build a different table altogether. I still see that morning like it was a photograph pinned to my refrigerator. The kitchen window carved a neat strip of sunlight across the formica, and the smell of coffee, bitter at the edges and warm in the mug, pulled me awake before my feet hit the linoleum. The church bulletin lay open on the table, the Pine Valley Retreat announcement folded along the crease where my thumb paused. $5,000. The number sat heavy on the glossy paper. Like a folded map, I had to decide whether to follow. I am 68. Widow. 68 feels small on a driver's license and big in a house that echoes. For 30 years I taught third grade. Chalk dust still under my nails if I happen to scrub long enough. And for most of my adult life the Baptist pews of Oak Ridge have been as steady as the kitchen table. Harold used to joke that I put my faith where my checkbook was. He's been gone 5 years now. His laugh is a soft presence in the house, the crease of his hand in the back of a chair. The pearls at my throat, his gift for our 40th, click sometimes when I bend over the sink. They feel like a promise I can still touch. The church bell rang on Sunday, the clear measured toll that means coffee in the fellowship hall. Hello at the door, the start of another week. I could hear it even from my kitchen as I folded the bulletin, a sound that always steadied me. The altar in the sanctuary has a small, worn Bible on a stand. Someone tacked a pale blue curtain behind it last spring. I like that curtain. Blue is a peaceful color. It reminded me of the dress Harold liked on me, the dress I planned to wear to Pine Valley if I could. I thumbed my checkbook open. My hands are the hands of a teacher. Steady, practiced in careful measures. The ink flowed and the numbers felt like an answer to a question I'd been praying about for months. Not because I wanted applause. Because when I saw the faces of the kids at potlucks and Sunday school, when I helped bake cookies for VBS and signed the attendance slips for youth trips, I felt rooted. The church had been my map for decades. Felt natural, right, to help. There are small things in our church that say a lot. The second pew from the front is almost always empty. Harold used to sit there because he complained about the glare from the stained glass. Someone left a hymn book in that pew last week, spine cracked, a pencil marking verses. I noticed it and thought of Harold, of how belonging can be as simple as a place to set your hymn book. The nursery window overlooks the foyer. A brass plaque near the door still bears my name from when I organized the bake sale 3 winters ago. These are ordinary things, silent proof that I had a place. After the service I tucked the sealed envelope into my purse. The pearls lay cool against my skin. Pastor Greg greeted people at the door like he always does. Warm palms, practice lines, a smell of cedar in his cologne. He took my hands when I offered the check. His eyes were wet for a moment and he said, "Dorothy, you are a blessing." It felt like a stitch closing a small old wound. I said nothing dramatic. I simply let the warmth settle in my chest. "Thank you," I said. He squeezed and I walked home with the envelope gone and a lightness inside me I hadn't expected. In the days before the retreat, my phone filled with pictures. A counselor at a campfire. A group with muddy sneakers. Ashley grinning with a marshmallow on a stick. Each photo felt like sunlight on a window, warm, real and distant. I pictured the testimonies they'd share. The soft tremor in a young voice when they say the name of Jesus. The sudden intake of breath when someone talks about forgiveness. I imagined sitting in the back and watching my grandchildren stand under that pale blue curtain and speak. That image became small and steady in me. Like keeping one dish in the sink for good. On Friday I laid out my navy dress on the bed, the one Harold always liked, slipped the pearls under my collar and told myself to breathe. The house smells change when I leave. Cedar from the coat in the hallway, the faint lemon of the dish soap, the old paper scent of the Bible on the bedside table. I locked the door and drove the 2 hours to Pine Valley feeling as if I was carrying a small, necessary light with me. There are subtle things that warn you before you know to be wary. The fellowship hall at Pine Valley smelled of cider and wax chairs, like 100 suppers stacked together. I saw the cross someone had taped to plywood, rough edges catching the light. A single folding chair sat alone against the back wall, empty, waiting. I didn't think anything of it at first. I thought of empty pews as spaces left open for those who need to come in later. I thought of belonging as a thing that couldn't be measured by attendance. I stood for a moment in the doorway and felt the echo of every handshake, every bake sale, every hymn from decades of Sundays. I felt in that quiet steadiness that I had done the right thing. The pearls at my throat felt both like an anchor and a small private armor. I told myself that whatever happened inside that hall that night, generosity was always a way to keep giving, whether the room knew it or not. Don't insist, Dorothy. Testimony night is just for staff and the youth. He said it with that practiced softness, like he was tucking a child into bed. Pastor Greg stood in the doorway and his shoulder took up the frame. He had the black Bible tucked under his arm, the same Bible he'd used from the pulpit for years. I could see the edge of the pages, the way one corner was bent from too many hands. His smile was in place, but the eyes didn't hold. My hands tightened on my purse until the leather dug into my palm. The pearls at my throat felt suddenly foreign, cool against the pulse at the base of my neck. For a breath the room narrowed to the strip of glass in the door and the figure on the other side, lit by the warm, bright light of the fellowship hall. Beyond that glass, a microphone caught a voice and sent it back as something holy and fierce. Laughter. A hymn. A young boy's shout of thanks. My $5,000. 3 months' worth of my pension, given without fuss. I had written that check with Harold's laugh still in my head. I had believed his words, Pastor's words, that I was essential. Pastor. The word felt small in my mouth. I could hear the hum of the lights, the scrape of folding chairs from inside. Sarah's hand rested on a stack of disposable cups by the buffet. She looked at Linda, and Linda's fingers tightened around a clipboard. Their eyes slid past me like a curtain being closed. "This is a space for the staff and the youth," Pastor Greg continued. "You said I was part of the ministry," I said. My voice wasn't steady. I could feel the heat rise to my cheeks as if someone had opened a cupboard and let summer spill out. "You told me that I was essential." And he said it again, the line he'd said on Sunday, like a rehearsed blessing. "Dorothy, you are a blessing. Your gift made this possible." His palms were warm when he had taken my hands in church. The memory of that warmth was a small, ordinary thing that hurt now because it was true once and not true in the way I needed it to be. "But not tonight," he finished, as if that altered anything at all. There was a tightness in my throat that had nothing to do with age. I could feel my hands go cold, the skin puckering around the knuckles. The purse strap left red crescents in my palm. Through the sliver of window I watched as a teenager crossed himself and another clasped hands like a prayer. And the words came up: sacrifice, forgiveness, new life. Ashley's laughter, muffled, rose like a bell and then softened into a voice at the mic. For a moment I hoped she would look toward the glass. She didn't. She looked toward the altar, toward the faces that had been allowed in. Linda averted her eyes. Sarah's notebook covered her lap like a shield. They had small, well-practiced gestures, brooch adjusting, pen tapping, that said more than any sermon. It wasn't only Pastor Greg who closed that door. It was everyone who stood politely to the side and let him hold it closed. I could have fallen apart there. I could have said something fierce, demanded the respect my years deserved, called out the injustice and watched the room tilt. Instead, something slower rose up in me. It was not forgiveness. It wasn't piety. It was a small, stubborn clarity. I thought of Harold's laugh and the way he'd insisted I put my faith where my checkbook was. I thought of the plates in my cabinet and the hymn books on the shelf, the late-night prayers over grandchildren with fever and scraped knees. I had given because I believed, not because I wanted a front-row seat tonight. But that belief did not mean I would stand on someone else's kindness and be invisible. My hands slackened. The leather pressed no more into my skin. I stepped back from the door and set my purse on the bench. The cool of the metal exit sign brushed my palm as if it were an anchor. I listened. Ashley's voice, clear and trembling with some holy courage, said the word sacrifice. The irony was so sharp it might as well have cut. When the testimonies ended and the doors opened, the teenagers spilled out like light. They came to me rushing full of the night. They didn't understand then the shape of what had happened. "You were out here, Grandma?" Ashley asked, cheeks flushed and eyes bright. "No," I said slowly. "They wouldn't let me in." Her face folded, confusion and a small, rising anger knitting her brow. "But you paid for all of it." That sentence, "you paid for all of it," became the hinge on which the next day swung. I went home and slept with the pearls at my throat, letting their cool weight remind me that something in me still had worth beyond the hard currency of welcome. The next morning I called the church office. My fingers hovered before I dialed, like a reluctant pianist. When Pastor Greg answered, I spoke in a voice I did not recognize as mine at first, calm, deliberate. I told him to redirect the $5,000. Not to some other line item in the church ledger. Not to a scholarship or a petty thank you card. I said the money would go to the community shelter in the next town, where people would be welcomed with a warm bed and a cup of coffee, not turned away from a room because they were labeled outsiders. There was a pause on the other end of the line that felt like a small confession. I don't know if he expected pleading. He did not get it. I felt the pearls rest against my chest like a promise kept. I had given before. Now I would give again on my terms. I learned, standing by the exit as the hall sang, that belonging can't be bought. You have to be seen to belong. If the church could not see me, I would find another place to put my faith where it would be used to welcome, not divide. The door was warm beneath my palm and the glass was cooler, like an old photograph gone damp. I stood there and watched faces I'd watched grow up, Boys with new haircuts, girls with braces gone, counselors who once handed me attendance slips, lean into the light as if the room belonged to them alone. My fingers tightened on the strap of my purse until the leather bit. The pearls at my throat felt heavy, as if someone had placed a weight there to measure whether I would stay or go. "Don't insist, Dorothy," Pastor Greg said again, as if repetition might change the shape of what he was asking me to accept. He kept his Bible tucked against his hip. His voice was gentle, practiced, the kind of gentle that closes cupboards. "I told Betty I'd come," I said, because my voice wanted a place to land. "Pastor Greg, you told me last Sunday I was part of the ministry." He blinked, a slow, polite blink that frayed before the eyes could tell the truth. For a second his smile faltered and something like calculation passed over his face. He touched the corner of his Bible with his thumb, an absent gesture that meant more than his words. "You are a blessing, Dorothy," he repeated. "This night is intimate. It's for the youth and staff to share without adult presence. You understand." Understand. The word landed like a coin dropped into some deep well. I could hear laughter from inside, the bright, untethered noise of teenagers, and then a voice at the mic saying the word forgiveness, so plainly it made my throat ache. I looked at Linda. Her fingers were wrapped around a clipboard as if it were an anchor. She adjusted the brooch on her lapel, the movement so small you could have missed it, but I saw it. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Sarah stood with her notebook open, pen between two fingers, the pen tapping once, twice, and then stopping as if it had forgotten why it was there. Their hands said what their mouths would not. "Pastor." I tried again. My words felt thin against the hum of the lights. "Ashley is in there. She'll tell you when she comes out." He cut in, as if the future could be scheduled like a casserole. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The wedding band on his finger caught the light, and the motion had the careful steadiness of someone practicing sincerity. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and watched Ashley laughing with a counselor. The light from within haloed her hair. She had a bracelet of braided friendship threads around her wrist. I remembered tying one on her at a VBS years ago. A photograph in my mind, her sticky-handed smile, Harold's jacket tossed over the back of a chair, kept sliding into place. An adolescent voice carried out a sentence about sacrifice, and for a moment I thought of Harold's laugh at the kitchen table. "You always put your faith where your checkbook is." I had done it because I believed in the work, not because I wanted a seat in the glow. Yet the word outsider hummed like an insect at the edge of my ear. He hadn't said it, but the air around his mouth held it. I watched Pastor Greg's jaw tighten just a fraction. A bead of sweat, fragrant with his cologne, gathered at his temple. He smiled and offered me a cup of coffee from the buffet as if hospitality could stitch what his words had torn. "There's coffee and cookies in the lobby," Linda said quickly, as if reading from a script. Her hands brushed past mine in a motion that looked like kindness and felt like avoidance. I could have raised my voice. I could have asked then why the people I had loved for decades would stand politely while a door closed in my face. But rage tastes like iron and I wanted something else, clarity maybe. So I listened. I let the testimonies roll into me through the thin window. God met me here. God changed my life. Each sentence felt like the small stones children skip across a pond. Ripples, then silence. Halfway through, Ashley mounted the stage. She said words about surrender and giving and the beauty of anonymous sacrifice. Her hands trembled a little when she clasped them in front of her. She brushed hair behind an ear without looking at the glass. For a sliver of a second I thought she'd search the crowd and find me. She didn't. She turned her face to the people inside and spoke as if the world she named belonged to them alone. When it was over, the doors opened and teenagers poured out into the night. Their laughter was bright and unself-conscious. Ashley ran across the gravel and flung herself at me. She crushed me in a hug that smelled like campfire and peppermint lip balm. You were outside, she said, breathless. They wouldn't let me in, I answered. The words sat in my mouth like seeds. She frowned. Morning, Pastor, I began. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I've been thinking. I'd like to redirect the $5,000 to the community shelter in Jasper. There was a pause long enough to hold the shape of his surprise. I could hear the rustle of paper, then his inhale. Dorothy, are you? I'm not asking you to convince me to change my mind, I said. My fingers tightened once around the receiver. I want the money to go to a place that opens its doors to everybody. He stammered something about process committees Thanksgiving. I listened. Then I said quietly, thank you for letting me be a blessing before. Now I want to bless differently. When I hung up, the pearls were still cool. My hand rested on them and I felt the small, stubborn certainty of that decision. It was not a dramatic act of revenge. It was a reallocation of faith. If the church could not see me as part of the room where its young people spoke of belonging, I would put my money where doors opened wide. I had been a fixture in those pews for decades. That night taught me a new lesson. Belonging is not automatic, even in the house where you've spent your life. Sometimes the heart has to choose where it will be seen. My money, my faith would go where people were welcomed. And that choice felt like the first honest prayer I had prayed in years. I started noticing it the Sunday after I asked them to send the money elsewhere. At first it was small. An extra inch of space in the pew when I slipped in. The hymn book left between strangers like a tiny barricade. The bell still rang the same clean note. The organ still warmed up in that low, familiar hum. But the faces that used to find mine before the sermon now slid past, practiced and polite, like curtains drawn in a wind. Betty, who had always squeezed my hand at the door, stepped back when I reached for her elbow. Her smile felt rehearsed and thin. Morning, Dorothy, she said, and there was a pause that could have fit a whole sentence in it. I could see the way her lips tightened around a secret. She glanced down at her purse as if checking for a lost list. Somewhere behind her shoulder, someone quieted a laugh. A whisper folded into the hymn Amazing Grace like a stray thread. Sarah's eyes no longer met mine during coffee hour. She would set a cup on the table and busy herself stirring it, the spoon clinking against porcelain in a rhythm I used to know. Once, she would bring me an extra biscuit and ask about Harold. Now she flipped the bulletin pages with fingers that avoided mine. The little notebook she always carried, her buffer, sat closed on her lap, pen tucked away like a weapon she feared to draw. Linda's greeting felt like a paper mask. Her clipboards and schedules, those meticulous lists that had always meant order, suddenly read like a script written to keep me out of the scene. She adjusted her brooch as I walked by and offered a cue about casserole dishes, the kind of small task meant to steer me away. Her eyes flicked to the side, then down. I understood the sentence she would not finish. Doors began to close before I reached them. Not literally, of course, no slammed wood, no lock signs. It was the way people moved. A group would form at the entrance with laughter that evaporated when I neared. A mother with a stroller crossed the lobby with sudden urgency and avoided the line of sight. Someone shoved a folding chair into place so fast the legs scraped the floor, and the sound was a little blade. Whispers followed me into pews. They were not mean at first. They were small, like the rustle of paper. She did what? I would hear, or the softened, puzzled note. Why would she do that? But whispers grow teeth. They sharpen into tidy narratives that fit better in gossip than in scripture. Stories that make room for condemnation because it is easier than confusion. Faces that had once welcomed me now rehearsed the looks of the polite. Eyebrows lifted, mouths closed. The sympathetic tilt of someone who knows the right answer but doesn't want to offer it. I began to find notes of exclusion as if they were hymns. On the committee board, my name was absent where it had been for years. A volunteer list that once had my handwriting clear looping was rewritten in sharp, newer hands. The bake sale plaque in the foyer, small brass, sun-faded. Looked like it belonged to someone else's memory. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and was hushed when he asked why I wasn't in the nursery roster anymore. Pastor Greg's sermons grew warmer in public measure, and cooler at the edges where I stood. He walked by one morning and nodded, the kind of nod that says you are seen but not included. His hand brushed a Bible as he passed. The gesture was practiced, the way someone smooths a borrowed coat. Once he had touched my hands like a tether. Now his hands were busy with schedules and church admin, kept at a respectful distance. There were moments when the church felt like a house that had quietly moved my chair to the corner. The coffee urn was always full, but no one offered me a refill. A conversation would begin at the altar about outreach and mission, and names I had known for decades were suggested for tasks I had once done. I sat and listened, voice small as a prayer, while they plotted the map of who belonged where. Sometimes the music swelled and I thought of the campfire voices I had been shut out of, the teenagers who had been given sanctuary inside that hall. Their joy echoed back as if mocking. The children still ran past me, shrill with childhood, unaware of adult calculations. That kept some nights from being unbearable. But even their parents tightened the leash. Ashley's waves from across the lobby were brief and halting, confused, ashamed maybe, for the role adults had let play out. She dropped a plate in my lap once, as if proximity could muffle the awkwardness. Her eyes asked the question I could not answer for her. Why would they keep me on the outside? I began to watch doors as if they were characters in a story. They opened for others with ease. They closed with a polite, almost tender firmness when I approached. People cited committees and privacy, schedules and rules. The language was soft, careful, as if the blunt truth might be unseemly within stained glass light. You'd think my 70-year presence would grant me a place among the pews. But it did not. Isolation braided itself into the small daily moments. The missed glance, the hollowed-out greetings, the way sanctuary felt stranger than the house I kept alone. There was a new seam running down the center of familiar faces, and I could not stitch it back with money or memory. The community that had raised my children and blessed my anniversaries started to behave like strangers who knew my name. And yet in the silence that followed those closed doors, something else uncoiled. It was not comfort. It was not vindication. It was a quiet clarity that arrived like dawn. If a place will not let you stand in its light, you learn to build your own. My pearls were cool against my collarbone. The house of my giving would have different doors. They might open for those the church had overlooked, or for the stranger who needed a bed. The realization was not loud. It was steady, like Sunday hymns humming under breath, and it held me when the rest of the room turned away. The doorway smelled of wax and warm cider, but deeper than that there was the dry, honest smell of wood. The pulpit's pine, the kind of smell that carries the weight of sermons and hymnals and years. It reached me through the glass like a memory. Inside, the sound of voices folded into itself and filled the room. The mic hummed a low, living note, and every syllable landed as if the walls were tuned to hold confession. Pastor Greg was in the frame, Bible tucked under his arm like armor. His smile was in place, but it didn't meet his eyes. He planted himself there, shoulder against the jamb, palm on the wood, and for a moment the doorway was a stage set built to stop me. "Don't insist, Dorothy," he said, the words soft as a benediction and sharp as a blade all at once. "Testimony night is for staff and the youth." My hands were folded over my purse strap until the leather pressed white crescents into my skin. I kept my breath in small, even measures, as if holding it could steady what I felt. You learn to keep yourself composed after 68 years of weather. Teachers learn that in front of classrooms. So I clipped my fingers together, knuckles tight, pearls cool against my throat. I breathed slowly. In, out, and tried to make the world make sense. Behind his shoulder, the stage light caught on plywood and a cross someone had taped up for the week. A thin candle stood on a folding table, the tiny flame steady in the warm air. A teenager's voice rose, clear and earnest, and the word forgiveness hung in the room like a hymn. Then the candle guttered. At first I thought it was a draft. Pine Valley always had drafts. But the flame died completely, soot blacking the wick, and Ashley's voice came through then. More fragile than I'd imagined, but full. "This week," she said, and her words rode the echo like a bell. "I've learned what true sacrifice is. We learned how to give up things for others, how to serve without expectation." Her hands twisted the friendship bracelet at her wrist. She didn't look toward the door. She didn't look for me. I pressed my forehead to the cool window, and the glass fogged with the heat of my breath. The echo of her voice vibrated through the wood and settled at the base of my skull. Sacrifice. Give without expectation. My thumbs found the strand of pearls at my collarbone and I felt their weight cool familiar, like the steady tap of a metronome. The irony was so sharp it tasted metallic. "Dorothy, you are a blessing," Pastor Greg said again. Faster this time, as if repeating the phrase might soften the edges of what he just closed. His words were almost theatrical, warmth offered like a program note, and they slid over me like a coat that didn't fit. I could feel my heartbeat in the pads of my fingers. The door's metal handle lay cold beneath my palm. There was an urge to lunge forward, to demand the truth of my own place, to call out that my name was on the bake sale plaque, that I had sung with them for decades, that my grandchildren were up there telling their stories. I imagined the words spilling out, sharp, indignant, raw, but then I watched the way shoulders in the crowd shifted away from me, the way people's eyes slid past me as if I were a sunbeam they'd learned to ignore. Instead I inhaled. I held that breath and let the sound of the hall find me, laughter, a guitar chord, a voice that said, "God met me here." All lined up like beads on a string. The crucifix's small fall still echoed inside me. The candle's sudden dark felt like a punctuation mark. I stepped back from the frame, my hands loosening, and set my purse on the bench beside the exit. It was a small, ordinary gesture, a teacher's habit, laying something down, and it anchored me. The leather was warm from my grip. For a moment I let the grief wash through. The cool of the pearls, the slickness of my palms, the rough edge of the tape that no longer held a cross upright. Something in me unclenched. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a sermon-ready mercy. It was clarity, quiet and stubborn. If my giving could be thanked with words and then folded away like a rehearsal prop, then the gift had not been received as dignity but as a line on a ledger. If my grandchildren could praise sacrifice on a stage while the people who had stewarded that space deemed me outside, then the space had boundaries I hadn't known were there. Ashley finished and there was applause, young, full, unself-conscious. It sounded like a praise I had once sung and still remembered the tune to. The doors opened and the glow spilled out, a wash of warm light that seemed to choose who it wanted to touch. The teenagers flowed past, voices bright, forgiveness fresh on their tongues. They came to me afterward with hugs and breathless descriptions of the week, and my heart both broke and mended in the same rhythm. But in that doorway, where the candle went dark and the cross fell and the pastor's smile refused to hold, something shifted. I realized that staying quiet in the name of belonging would make me smaller. And I had carried too many years and too many names to shrink now. So I stepped away from the light they would not share with me and felt the cool of the exit sign above. The decision, when it came, was not a flare of anger. It was a long, steady unfastening. I would replace my giving where the doors opened wide. I would build a different table. The room behind the glass was full of song. Mine would be a different kind of hymn. I held the phone like it might snap in my hands. The line hummed with Pastor Greg's distant, practiced calm. I could hear the faint scrape of paper, maybe a bulletin, and for a second I was back in the fellowship hall, the doorway a frame that had been closed on me. "Pastor Greg," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I'd like to redirect the $5,000 to the community shelter in Jasper." There was a pause long enough that I pictured him measuring how to answer, how to keep the ledger whole and the ritual intact. In that pause I felt the shape of what I was doing settle under my ribs like a stone placed where the wound had been, Not to hurt it, but to give it something fixed to hold on to. "You're sure?" he asked finally. I heard the question as if he expected tears or bargaining. I pictured Harold's grin at my kitchen table, and the way he used to tease that I put my faith where my checkbook was. I pictured the hymn book in the second pew that had his margin notes in a childlike pencil. I pictured Ashley's hands twisting that little friendship bracelet on stage, while words of sacrifice spilled like coin into the air. I had given because I believed. I was giving now because I deserved to be seen by the room my gift created. "Yes," I said. "Please reroute it." The next morning I drove to Jasper with my pearls tucked under my collar, and a checkbook in the seat beside me. The shelter sat off Main like a place that had grown up quietly. Steel sign, chipped paint, a porch that sagged just a little in the middle. It smelled like coffee and laundry, and somehow that felt honest. Inside, the intake office had a narrow desk and a woman at a laptop who looked like she'd been up all night and kept going anyway. "I'm Dorothy Wilson," I said. "I'd like to speak about a donation." Her name tag read Maria. She stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and smiled in a way that didn't have a hole in it. "Come on back, Ms. Wilson," she said. "We've been waiting to hear about community support." The forms were simple. No sermon, no justifications, just boxes to sign and a line that said how the funds would be used. Beds for the winter dorms. A caseworker position for youth outreach. A counselor's stipend for trauma support. I read each line and felt my muscles uncoil. This was tangible. This was immediate. A volunteer brought a tray of coffee. The cup was warm between my palms. I listened as Maria walked me through the calendar. Evening shelter, daytime job training, a room reserved for families with children. She pointed to photographs on the wall, headshots of volunteers, a bulletin board with thank you notes. One note was from a kid named Tyler. "Thank you for the bed." The handwriting was shaky and full of the kind of hope that makes you want to straighten your spine. "You'll be helping with the youth program?" Maria asked. Her eyes searched my face like she was looking for the person behind the check. "I will," I said. "And I'll help however you need." There was no martyrdom in that handshake. There was simply a woman 2 rooms and 3 decades away from the pulpit placing her resources where doors stayed open. I signed the sheet, the pen's click filling the small room like punctuation. The ink took the shape of my name, the same way my hand had signed teacher rosters for years. Felt like a promise I could keep. Outside, a teenage boy sat on the steps, hoodie pulled up against an autumn breeze. He cradled a styrofoam bowl of chili and watched me as if trying to decide whether to offer a hello. I tipped my chin toward the doorway and he looked up. "Ma'am," he said, uncertain. "Hi," I answered. "How's the chili?" He grinned a little, relieved, and told me it was spicy enough to wake you up. We laughed, awkward and small, and he told me his name, Malcolm, and then because kids always spill the soft parts, he told me about the night they let him in after he'd been turned away at another shelter. "They gave me a cot," he said. "I slept like a log." The words landed in me like a benediction. Not the kind from a pulpit, but the kind that comes from a sturdy bowl and a real night's sleep. I pressed my fingers to the pearls at my throat. They were cool. They had been a symbol of a life shared with Harold. Now they felt like a bridge to something else. Back home, the house echoed differently. The second pew still held that hymn book, and the bake sale plaque still caught the morning light. But the hollow ache that had followed me since the fellowship hall closed its door had softened into something like resolve. I had not needed permission to belong. I had made a place where my belonging meant work and welcome, not a seat at someone else's table. In the weeks that followed, the shelter sent photographs. New mattresses stacked in a dorm room, an intake volunteer smiling with a badge that read welcome, and a small group of teenagers in an after-school class with a woman writing the words job skills on a dry erase board. Each picture was a small epistle. Each one confirmed that money, when placed where doors open, becomes more than currency. It becomes a way people keep each other alive. The church didn't change overnight. People still nodded with polite distance in the foyer. Pastor Greg still shook hands with a practiced warmth. But the exclusion that had felt like an indictment was now a map, not a cage. I could have stayed and scraped for acceptance. Instead, I helped build a room where belonging, I learned, isn't always a hand extended to you. Sometimes it's the hand you extend to others. Sometimes it's the table you build after you walk out of a room that closed on you. The pearls clicked softly when I reached up to touch them, less talisman than testimony now. I thought of Harold, of hymn books, of the second pew. I smiled because the truth of it was simple and stubborn. I was still giving. I was still a blessing. I was just blessing somewhere that would not close its door on me. I went back to Oak Ridge the Sunday after I redirected the money. The bell still tolled that same clean note, 3 times, sure and steady, but when I stepped into the foyer the light on the hymn board felt thinner. The second pew still held that hymn book with Harold's penciled notes. The spine softened where he liked to underline his favorite verses. I ran a fingertip along the margin as if I could read him there. I sat down for a few moments, just to feel the wood under my knees, the old varnish warm where a body had rested 1,000 Sundays. The coffee urn gurgled somewhere behind the curtain of conversation. Faces I'd known all my life passed like a slow, practiced current. Some nodded, most looked away. Words hovered, Dorothy, and then folded back into polite quiet. The pew felt too large for a single body and too small for the whole life I'd carried into it. Afterward, I walked to where the bake sale plaque hangs. The brass caught the morning light and blushed. My name was still there, tiny and sun-faded. I touched the letters with the pad of my thumb, like one might test a coin for weight. The weight was different now. It belonged to history and to thrift stores and to 100 casseroles served at potlucks. It did not call me back the way it used to. I thought of the night at Pine Valley, the candle that blew out, the cross that slipped, and of Ashley's voice up on that little stage saying how she'd learned to give without expectation. I thought of Malcolm on the shelter steps, the chilly bowl warming his hands, the way he looked up shyly and said, "Thanks," like the whole world might hinge on simple gratitude. The pictures on Maria's intake wall, mattresses stacked, a volunteer's thank you note, felt like the sort of proof that mattered. Outside the church, the air had a thin edge to it. A few leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and the wind found the door when someone let it go. It swung quietly a hinge side and I watched it in slow relief. I did not hurry after it. I did not try to wedge myself back into the room it had closed on. For a second I let the bell's distant echo roll through me like tidewater. I walked down Main instead of toward the fellowship hall. The shelter is not far. Just a stretch of cracked pavement and a sign with paint flaking at the edges. It smells of laundry and strong coffee when you step inside. Someone was humming an old hymn as they sorted blankets on a table. Maria looked up and smiled in a way that didn't ask for anything but thanked you for being there. They had named the new youth program Second Table. A small joke about who sits where. I said nothing when they told me. I only watched the teenagers gather around the folding tables. No stage, no taped cross, just a whiteboard marked with job skills and a stack of clean sheets. Malcolm was there, sleeves rolled up, spoon balancing in a pot as he tasted a stew. His grin when he saw me was crooked and whole. He said, "Grandma Dorothy," and the nickname landed like a homing whistle. I set the pearls against my collarbone as I always do. They were cool and familiar and not meant to be a decoration anymore, but a little talisman that reminded me I had once chosen to give. I signed the forms for a scholarship fund, then helped refill a crock pot of chili. Small things. Folding laundry, writing schedules on the whiteboard, teaching a boy how to fill in his name on an application without crumpling the paper. The work was ordinary and urgent and full of a practical holiness I recognized immediately. Sometimes in the evenings I go and sit on a bench outside the church. The pews in my heart are many. A bench is small and honest. I watch people cross the lawn. Some in laughter, some in conversation, some moving like they carry a whole season on their shoulders. The light through the stained glass paints the path with smudges of color like someone's careful apology. The church door closes behind me half the time. The sound is not loud. It is a soft domestic click like a lid set down. Once I used to mistake that click for welcome. Now I hear it as punctuation. It marks an ending and points somewhere else, to a sentence still being written. The wind finds the jamb and slips it in place. The echo of steps fades. That small final hush is its own kind of benediction. On other nights, the door does not close for me at all. It opens for others with the literal ease of hinges well-oiled, light spilling out to meet them like hands. I do not stand and judge the sound. I fold my coat tighter around me and walk toward the shelter where a kettle whistles and a bulletin board waits to be filled. The sound of children learning to read, of someone teaching a teenager how to iron a shirt, follows me like a hymn I can carry. I am not smaller for having been framed out of that one light. Instead, I have traded a single doorway for many. I have learned that a room becomes sacred not because satin curtains are hung, but when people are not counted as outsiders at the threshold. There is a rhythm to it. A pot ladled, a cot made, a young hand held steady while they practice introducing themselves into a world that asks a lot. That rhythm keeps me awake at night in the best sort of way. Sometimes I stop at the second pew on the way back, lay my palm on the hymn book, and whisper a small benediction of thanks into the crease where Harold used to underline verses. Then I go outside. The bench under the maple is empty and waiting. I sit. The sun slants through the leaves, and the wind arranges itself into the hush of another day ending. Step by step, a few children laughing in the distance, I hear the church door close, a quiet, ordinary click, and I breathe out. The sound is final enough to feel like a line drawn in the dirt. But the wind keeps moving. It takes the note with it, and where it leaves a space, I plant a table. I put out cups. I set a chair. Someone comes and sits. We pass the bowl and the world opens 2 doors at a time. I still see that morning like a photograph taped to my kitchen cabinet. Sunlight cut a flat strip across the counter. The coffee smelled a little burnt at the edges. I was folding the church bulletin when my thumb paused over the Pine Valley announcement. $5,000 needed. The number felt heavy in my chest, like a stone I could hand to someone else. Harold used to joke that I put my faith where my checkbook was. He wasn't there to laugh anymore, but the pearls he gave me on our 40th anniversary were warm against my throat as I wrote the amount. The ink dried and I walked to church with the envelope in my purse, thinking how right it would feel to help the kids, my grandchildren among them, have a week that might change them. Pastor Greg took my hands after the service. His palms were warm. He said, "Dorothy, you are a blessing." For a minute I believed I belonged to something bigger than my quiet house. The week of the retreat, my phone filled with pictures. Muddy boots on a trail, counselors laughing, Ashley toasting a marshmallow. My heart climbed every time. On the last night they would have a testimony service. I pictured myself in the back, pearls tucked under my collar, listening as the young voices spoke about forgiveness and new life. When I arrived at Pine Valley, the fellowship hall smelled like cider and wax chairs. People moved around the buffet, voices low and familiar. Then Pastor Greg stepped into the doorway. He had that practiced smile on, the black Bible under his arm. "Dorothy," he said, polite as always, "you don't need to come inside." My stomach dropped. "But Pastor," I began. He softened the words like a bandage. "This is a space for staff and the youth. Privacy. They need to speak freely, without adults present." He didn't say outsider. He didn't have to. The shape of the sentence held it. My hands closed white on my purse strap. Through the narrow window of the door I could see the stage and a taped cross, and the light inside made the glass a mirror of every year I'd thought I belonged. I stood by the exit like a sentinel. The metal under my palm was cool. Voices rose. Forgiveness. Changed. God met me here. And each phrase landed in me like a pebble. Halfway through, Ashley stepped up. Her voice broke. "This week I learned the true meaning of sacrifice," she said. and she looked out toward faces allowed in. She didn't look through the glass. She didn't look for me. When the service ended, they opened the doors and the kids spilled out into the night, flushed and loud. Ashley ran to me, breathless with stories. Driving to Jasper felt like stepping into a new kind of light. The shelter smelled of coffee and laundry. Maria at the intake desk wiped her hands and smiled without a hole in it. "We've been waiting to hear about community support," she said. The forms were plain: beds for winter, a counselor for the youth outreach, job skills classes. It was tangible. It was immediate. A boy named Malcolm sat on the steps with a bowl of chili. When he told me he'd been turned away elsewhere and slept like a log the night they took him in, something inside me softened in the way only good coffee and a warm blanket can soften a heart. The money I had given to buy a week of camp became beds, a worker, a program that stayed open through cold nights and hard mornings. Back in Oak Ridge, the pews felt thinner. People's eyes slid past me with practiced politeness. Linda adjusted her brooch. Sarah's notebook covered her hands like a shield. Stung, yes. But the sting taught me something. Giving had never been a ticket to a lifetime of welcome. I had confused gratitude for belonging, so I kept going to the shelter. I signed paperwork, ladled chili, taught a teenager how to fill out an application without crumpling it. The work was ordinary and urgent. The gratitude on a young man's face when he got a cot was quieter than any applause at Pine Valley, but it lasted longer. Sometimes I still sit on the bench outside my church and run my thumb along Harold's penciled margins in the hymn book in the second pew. The brass bake sale plaque still catches the morning light. The bell still rings the same clean notes. I remember Pastor Greg's warm hand in mine, and I let it be a memory, not a demand. The shelter put up a small sign, "Second Table," and people came with backpacks and tricky histories and laughter that arrived like relief. I found myself at a table where doors stayed open, where my giving meant someone else had a place to sleep, a counselor to call, a person who answered the phone at 3 in the morning. I had given before because I believed. I give now for the same reason. Only now I choose where my gifts become shelter rather than tokens on a ledger. I learned that generosity doesn't always keep you in the same room. Sometimes it gives you the courage to build another. The secret I kept was simple. I would not stay invisible. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.